NVIDIA just published a report claiming that 88% of the companies are increasing revenue with AI. But here's what they don't highlight. A third of the same respondents also said that they can't clearly measure AI's return on investment. They're reporting revenue gains that they admit they can't verify. Nobody caught it because you'd have to read all 4 reports plus a blog post and comparing every single chart. That took me the better part of a week. I found 4 cracks in NVIDIA's own data and 3 real trends their analysts were too busy hyping to highlight. But let's start with what NVIDIA actually means when they say AI. The definition traits that inflate every number. When NVIDIA says AI in these reports, they aren't just talking about ChatGPT or generative AI tools. They're talking about, for example, your bank's fraud alerts, the Amazon's recommendation engine, the AI reads your MRI, the system keeps your phone signal stable. All that is in the same report, all also counted as AI adoption alongside ChatGPT and agentic AI. Here's a screenshot below that talks about the top 5 AI used in the finance industry report. They're using these decades-old machine learning features to prove that the era of AI revolution is here and that you should buy more GPUs. So everything that follows sounds more revolutionary than it actually is. When these respondents tell NVIDIA that AI has increased our revenue, it might mean JP Morgan's fraud model gets better at catching more stolen cards, or Amazon's that you might also like box got better at upselling you. But it's not the same of what majority of us would think the AI adoption in 2026. Not the same as chatbot closes a deal or an AI agent runs Amazon shops. On top of that, if you read this chart, you think 64% of the participants are now actively using AI. However, how do they define actually using AI? So does that mean someone actively using ChatGPT in the last 10 minutes trying to get the best email opening also considered as actively using? Why am I talking about this? Because this phrase, actively using, is actually doing enormous work across all these 4 PDFs. But there's no definition to it. Keep that in mind. Now, let's talk crack number 1. The return on investment nobody can prove. Exactly the kind of headline again. Across all 4 reports covering over 3,000 respondents, every single industry reported that 80% or even more said AI is helping increase revenue. So here you see a wall of green numbers. It really looks like the whole economy just figured AI out. Now, I want you to also read the challenge section of those exact same reports. You will see roughly 30% of the respondents across the whole survey listed lack of clarity on AI's return on investment as one of their top barriers. And we see the same thing if we read the telco one. A big number in the telco report executive section, it claims 90% says AI is helping to increase revenue. However, in this exact same report, the challenge of not knowing what to measure is also re-emphasized. So you've got a third of the same people saying 2 entire opposite things at once. AI is increasing our revenue, and we actually don't know how to measure the impact. Both cannot be true at the same time. I get it. Nobody who just signed off a multi-million-dollar AI budget is going to tell a survey that it was a mistake. But it gets more interesting here. Let's continue with crack number 2. C-suite see gains nobody else can find. NVIDIA breaks down the revenue number by seniority. Basically, who has reported how much of the revenue increase because of AI. Overall, 30% of respondents says AI increased revenue by more than 10%. But among C-suite and VPs, that jumps to 40%. So the executives are seeing 10% points more revenue impacts from AI than the rest of the organization. Where does that 10% come from, really? Is there a secret AI that only runs on the executive floor? Of course not. Well, actually, we wouldn't know. Anyways, this pattern isn't unique to NVIDIA's data. There is an overall trend of how C-levels report a much higher level of confidence in AI than anyone else in an organization. Here's some data I drew from another independent survey. This graph was redone by Wall Street Journal. Found the exact same pattern. While nearly 40% of the C-suite believes that AI saved more than 8 hours per week, whereas only two-thirds of the staff's reporting saving under 2 hours per week. It's interesting how people reporting the biggest gains are structurally the furthest away from the actual day-to-day workflow, while they are the most invested in the answers being positive. Now, crack number 3. Half of the AI agent headlines is actually only vendor being assessed. So here, NVIDIA says roughly between 42 to 48% of the organizations are using or assessing agentic AI across these 4 reports. But does that really mean these industries now all live in the AI future? Here is a screenshot example from the telco report. The agent assessing versus deployed trend is the same across all 4 industry reports. There are only a fifth of the respondents actually deployed AI agents, which means the 40% plus using AI agent headline is actually people still evaluating vendors. What cracks the report further is the challenge respondents reported. Because of all those who deployed using or still assessing AI agents, there are a third are telling you the results drift, the outputs are unpredictable. Here is a screenshot of the finance industry report. The top one of AI agent challenge reported is performance reliability issues. I hope this speaks for itself. Now, for our next contradiction, let me ask you this question first. If you're a CEO, the measurements are shaky, the executives are most optimistic, and the agents aren't really reliable yet. What's your plan then with your AI budget next year? Crack number 4. Every industry found the bottleneck, then spent elsewhere. Every industry in this report lists lack AI experts or internal skill to monitor AI agents are lacking as their top barriers. For example, in retail, it jumped from 31% to 46% in a single year and become the number one thing holding companies back from AI deployment. And in finance, their second largest challenge when using AI agents is the lack of internal skill or expertise to manage or monitor them. The same lack of AI expertise also noted in 2 other reports. By the way, they never defined what an AI expert is, the same game as they talked about actively using AI. It could mean a machine learning engineer building custom models, or it could mean an intern who's really good at prompting, but we don't know that because they didn't say anywhere in the report. But fine, talent is the bottleneck. We take that. What are these companies actually spending on then? I then put together the AI spending priorities from all 4 reports. In finance, the number 1 spending is optimizing existing workflow. And then in healthcare, the same thing. In telecom, the top priority is engaging third-party partner to help speeding up AI adoption, rather than hiring AI talent or even training internal teams to adopt AI skills. So all 4 industries diagnosed the same problem. We don't have the people who can help us operate on AI. But then 3 of them wrote the same prescription. We are going to spend more on something else. It's like going to a doctor and hearing that you need a new heart valve, but then walking out with a prescription for better posture. The diagnosis was right there, but the prescription entirely ignored it. Now, let's talk about what NVIDIA analysts were too busy hyping to notice. So all 4 contradictions in, it probably sounds like I think these reports are useless. I don't. There are a few things in this data actually matter. They all have one thing in common. They're all boring, well, in a good way. Let's talk about signal 1. Here's the first signal. Why every company builds the same AI agent. Here's a number that kept showing up while I was reading the AI reports. Across all 4 industries, roughly between 20 to 23% of the companies are actually deployed AI agents. Not assessing, not evaluating vendors, but deployed. Finance is at 21%, healthcare 22%, retail 20%, telecom 23%. All 4 completely unrelated industries. Almost same deployment rate. So my first question was, why? And then I look into what they actually use the AI agent for, and it suddenly makes a lot of sense. The top use cases are almost identical everywhere. For example, knowledge management and retrieval showing up in all four reports. You also see internal process optimization, customer support automation. Because when you start thinking about it, you will realize that actually every bank, telco, hospital, and retail has documents to search, processes to speed up, and customer support tickets to handle. This conversions really tells you where most of the industry is right now. They're still picking the low-hanging fruit. Most companies and even industries are still solving the same generic problems with just like different logos on the same dashboard. But what's buried in those reports are also another interesting pattern that we are going to look into are how a handful of companies that actually broke away from the pack. And their results look completely different. So here's our signal two. Boring projects, real money. When you look at which AI projects are returning real money across all these reports, they have the same shape. They aren't a company-wide transformation, but one team solving one very specific problem. In finance, the top return on investment use case is document processing. But here's more detail. Banks are using AI to chew through loan applications and compliance paperwork rather than having a room full of people doing it. And that is the specific use case. And another example in healthcare. More than half of the medtech companies say they seeing returns from AI, especially in medical imaging, where AI flags an anomaly on the scan so radiologist knows where to double check. And other examples like in retail, it's demand forecasting for supply chain, or in telco, it's network automation. None of these are exciting enough to go to anyone's LinkedIn post. Nobody is writing, oh, we've used AI to automate an entire team with a flyer emoji. But these are exactly the projects with really clear return on investments that points back to AI. And that's the pattern, because every time when I see a credible AI adoption win in those reports, it's the same thing. You have one team pick the problems they know so well. The data already exists, and the KPI aligns with what they've already been measuring for the last few decades. AI is only a technology to solve an old problem. AI doesn't change the measurement, and it shouldn't have to. Just to emphasize this a bit more, which are the companies that are still struggling to measure their return on investment with AI? It would usually be the entire opposite of what I just said. They try to do a broad rollout, lots of use cases being explored, and thoughts that they need AI-specific KPIs. And then we take a step back. Think about which are the companies who's still struggling in measuring their AI return on investment. It's usually the entire opposite than what I just mentioned. They typically do broad rollout, lots of use cases being explored, and then they thought they would need an AI-specific KPI. Now, here's the third indication you should learn from this NVIDIA AI report. The data wall was always there. For a few years, one of the top challenges in these surveys was we don't have enough data to train our models. That number has been dropped. In finance, it went from 49% in 2023 to 16% this year. In retail, 27% last year to 13% in 1 year time. But it doesn't mean that the data problem is getting better. It probably means something else. It might mean that companies now graduated from pilot phases where you could still train a model on a clean sample data from one single apartment. But now, when you got into deployment phase, where you actually need data is information across the whole organization. And that's when you discover data sits in different systems under different privacy rules in different countries, and nobody ever builds the connections. Here's where it comes from. If you look into their finance reports, data issues around privacy and sovereignty actually went up this year, from 33% to 40%. And in telecom, data-related challenge actually nearly triple in 3 years, going from 20% to 54%. The wall was always there. These companies just hadn't walked far enough to hit it yet. The wall of these fragmented data was always there. I suspect a lot of companies just hadn't walked far enough to hit it yet. And the fact that they're hitting it now is weirdly a sign of progress. It means they got past the demo stage. Now, here's another interesting signal I found. Budgets are finally following results. This one more thing that's also consistent across the reports, and I'm going to tell you this, it's likely the most encouraging one. In previous years, the top spending priority across these industries were identifying new AI use cases. Basically trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what sticks. This year, however, that's no longer number one in most industries. The clearest example here is healthcare. Last year, find new use case was at the top priority, nearly 50%. This year, it dropped to 37%, and the optimized AI workflows and product cycles took over, jumped from 34 to nearly 50. Those two literally swap positions. Finance and retail also show the same flip. The companies who have found something that works are now putting money into making it run better, run cheaper, and faster. The try AI on everything phase is winding down. They're basically saying, we found the thing that moves the number, so let's spend more on the same thing. That's the most rational signal I found after I read all these NVIDIA reports. So next time, if anyone who quotes the X% of return on investment seen in AI projects at you, 3 questions are worth sending back. Start with first, what are we building around the model, not just plugging it in? Second, what specific number are we trying to move and by how much? Third, where do we actually have clean connected data right now? If they cannot answer any of the 3 questions, the high return on investment percentage from another company means nothing. So the next time when you see a headline claiming that AI is driving massive ROI, don't just look at the percentage. Look at how it's measured, who's reporting it, and what's actually being counted as AI. Because right now, the gap between percentage and reality is where most of the noise is coming from. This is part of my series, Big Claim, Small Print, where I read and analyze the latest industry reports so you don't have to. Click to watch more.